I am Julian, 32 years old. After 8 years of giving every single ounce of my soul, my time, my energy, and my fundamental dignity to my marriage, my wife threw our divorce papers across our kitchen island and looked at me like I was something disgusting she had just scraped off her expensive designer shoe. She told me I was dead weight and that she was finally throwing out the trash. While I was standing there, trying to process the sudden, violent death of the life we had meticulously built together, she actually pulled out her phone, called my father on speaker, and said the cruelest thing I have ever heard in my entire life. She told him to come pick up his useless son because she did not want me anymore. She laughed while she said it, standing right in front of me in the home I had maintained, cooked in, and cared for every single day while she ruthlessly chased her corporate promotions. But there was one massive, world-shattering thing Vanessa did not know. She had absolutely no idea about my family's actual inheritance, the multi-billion-dollar real estate empire my grandfather built from the ground up, or who the man she was currently mocking on the phone truly was. And right now, as you listen to this, she is the one living in a tiny, cramped apartment, begging for her entry-level job back, completely ruined by her own bottomless arrogance. Before I tell you exactly how her entire world collapsed in a matter of minutes, please hit that like button if you truly believe that karma always comes for the greedy. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support is what gives me the strength to share this. Now, let's go back to the exact moment the storm hit. The morning my marriage officially ended started just like any other Tuesday in our upscale Ohio suburb. It was raining outside. It was that cold, relentless, bone-chilling rain that makes you want to stay in bed and hide from the world. But I did not have that luxury. I had woken up at 5:30 in the morning, just like I did every single day without fail. I went down to the kitchen to brew the expensive, imported dark roast coffee Vanessa insisted on drinking. I went into the laundry room and carefully ironed her silk blouse for her big quarterly presentation. For years, this was my unwavering routine. I took care of the house, I managed the bills, I did the grocery shopping, and I took care of her. I wanted her to succeed. I genuinely believed that her victories were our victories. I was the silent partner in her rising career, making sure she never had to worry about a single domestic issue. When she walked into the kitchen that morning, the air in the room completely shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. She did not even look at me. She was wearing her brand new designer trench coat, the one she bought after her last major promotion, and she was carrying a thick, heavy manila envelope. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, a sound that usually meant she was in a rush, but today it sounded like a countdown. The granite countertop was freezing cold under my hands as I set down her steaming coffee mug. She did not reach for it. Instead, she tossed the envelope. It slid across the smooth stone island and stopped mere inches from my fingers. Divorce papers. I already signed them. Her voice was completely hollow. She was not angry. She was not sad. She was not even frustrated. She just sounded entirely bored, like she was canceling a gym membership she had not used in months. As soon as you sign, we are finished, she added, scrolling through her phone. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the thick stack of legal documents. I could see the bold black ink through the opening of the envelope. I could see clauses about the house, the cars, the division of our supposedly shared wealth. I looked up at her, my chest tightening so hard I could barely draw a breath. 8 years, Vanessa. I forced the words out of my tight throat. 8 years of my life, and this is all it gets? Just an envelope on the counter before you head to the office? We are not even going to sit down and talk about this? She checked her watch. It was a beautiful, diamond-encrusted timepiece I had saved up for months to buy her for our 5th anniversary. I had worked overtime at the nonprofit just to afford it, wanting her to feel like she belonged with the upper management at her firm. I have moved on, Julian. I am tired of carrying dead weight. You have absolutely no ambition. You make a pathetic salary at that charity of yours. I need a man who is actually going places, not a glorified maid who happens to be my husband. My career is taking off and you are just an anchor dragging me down. Dead weight. A glorified maid. The words echoed in the quiet kitchen, bouncing off the walls we had painted together, echoing over the dining table we had assembled together. I realized right then, with brutal clarity, that the woman I had married was completely and utterly gone. In her place was a ruthless corporate shark who measured human worth entirely by bank accounts, job titles, and stock portfolios. She did not care about the late nights I stayed up taking care of her when she was sick. She did not care about the countless times I swallowed my own pride so she could shine in front of her colleagues. I did not scream. I did not beg her to stay. I did not throw the coffee mug against the wall. I reached into the drawer, pulled out a black pen, and signed my name on the dotted line. I did not even read the clauses. I knew what she wanted. She wanted everything. She wanted the house, the savings, the cars. She wanted to erase me completely. She snatched the papers back so fast the ink almost smeared across the page. A victorious, ugly smirk spread across her perfectly made-up face. Then, she pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm. "I am calling your father," she said, tapping the screen with a manicured nail, "so he can come collect his trash." The phone rang twice on speaker. Every ring felt like a hammer striking an anvil. My father answered with his usual deep, composed, authoritative voice. "Hello?" Vanessa leaned into the phone, her smile widening. "Mr. Whitmore, come pick up your useless son. I am divorcing him. He has exactly 20 minutes to get his junk out of my house before I change the locks and throw his clothes on the lawn. I do not want him anymore." There was a long, incredibly heavy silence on the other end of the line. I knew my father better than anyone. I knew the kind of immense power he wielded in boardrooms across the country. I knew the kind of ruthless, powerful men who trembled when he simply paused during a business negotiation. My father did not tolerate disrespect, and he certainly did not tolerate anyone threatening his family. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a man who had already won a war the enemy did not even know they were fighting. "We will be there in 1 minute." The call clicked off. Vanessa threw her head back and laughed out loud. 1 minute? What, is he waiting around the corner in his beat-up Ford? "Let's see what kind of junk car your family shows up in to haul you away, Julian. Make sure you pack fast." I looked out the kitchen window at the rain pouring down on our quiet suburban street. I thought the worst part of my life was finally over. I was so incredibly wrong. The storm had not even started yet. To truly understand how we ended up in this kitchen, facing a divorce fueled by pure greed, you have to understand the massive lie our entire marriage was built upon. It was a lie I started, for all the right reasons, but it was a lie that ultimately poisoned the soil of our relationship. 8 years ago, I was fresh out of a highly prestigious university. My grandfather had built Whitmore Holdings from a single, rusty delivery truck in Cleveland into a global logistics, real estate, and investment empire. My father took over the company and expanded it tenfold. When I graduated, I was fully expected to take my rightful seat on the board of directors, manage the family's massive trust funds, and prepare to inherit a fortune that most normal people cannot even fathom in their wildest dreams. But I had grown up watching people fawn over my last name. I saw the fake, plastered smiles at charity galas. I saw the strategic, calculated friendships. I saw the women who looked at my bank account and my family's real estate portfolio long before they ever looked at my eyes. I absolutely hated it. I told my parents I wanted to live a normal, grounded life first. I wanted to earn my own mistakes. I wanted to know what it felt like to build something without the safety net of a billion-dollar trust fund protecting me from the real world. So, I took a job at a local nonprofit organization, earning a very basic entry-level salary. I rented a small, drafty apartment on the edge of town. I drove a reliable, used sedan that I bought with my own saved cash. That was exactly when I met Vanessa. She was smart, she was funny, and she seemed so incredibly grounded. We met at a community volunteer event, packing boxes for a local food drive. We ate cheap takeout pizza on the floor of my apartment because I could not afford to buy a dining table yet. We talked for hours about building a life together, step by step, brick by brick. When I brought her home to meet my parents for the very first time, my parents played along perfectly. We met at a modest rental property they owned, acting exactly like a standard middle-class retired couple living on a fixed income. I desperately wanted Vanessa to love Julian the man, not Julian the billionaire heir to the Whitmore inheritance. For the first few years, it was beautiful. It was everything I had ever wanted. We struggled, we saved, we budgeted, and we loved each other. But then, Vanessa started aggressively climbing the corporate ladder at a major logistics firm. The promotions came fast. Her salary doubled and then it tripled. And as her bank account grew rapidly, her personality shrank in equal measure. The real catalyst for our downfall was her mother, Beatrice. Beatrice was a woman who lived entirely for neighborhood gossip, keeping up appearances, and country club status. Whenever we had Thanksgiving dinners at their house, Beatrice would make a deliberate point to publicly humiliate me. She would loudly ask about my retirement accounts in front of all our extended family members. She would look out the window at my reliable, older car and ask when I was going to stop embarrassing her daughter and buy a real vehicle. Vanessa used to defend me. She used to hold my hand under the table and tell her mother to stop. But slowly, over time, the toxic, relentless drip of her mother's words took hold. Vanessa started agreeing with her. I remember the exact moment I felt the shift. We were attending a massive corporate dinner for her company. I was wearing my absolute best suit, but it was not a custom designer label. Her colleagues were flashing solid gold Rolexes and talking loudly about their offshore investments, their college fund accounts for their unborn children, and their vacation homes. On the ride home, Vanessa did not speak a single word to me. When we pulled into our driveway, she finally snapped. "You looked like a lost intern tonight, Julian." It was utterly embarrassing. Everyone else's husband is a vice president or a CEO, and you are organizing charity drives for pennies. When are you going to grow up and get a real job? I swallowed my pride. I reminded her that my work actually helped desperate people. I reminded her that we had enough money to live comfortably. She just rolled her eyes, slammed the car door, and walked inside without looking back. I tried harder. I took over every single household chore so she could focus entirely on her demanding career. I cooked all the meals, I cleaned the floors, I managed the landscapers for our strict homeowners association. I became the invisible, silent foundation of her success. But to her, I was no longer a partner. I was just the help. Then came the profound betrayal that truly broke me. I had a best friend named Greg. We had known each other since our college days. Greg was struggling financially to find work, and I had asked Vanessa if her company had any open positions. She said she would look into it as a favor to me. One afternoon, I came home early from the nonprofit because I had a blinding migraine. I walked softly into the house and heard Vanessa on the phone in the home office. The door was cracked open just a few inches. "I know, Greg," she was saying, laughing loudly into the phone. "Julian is just so pathetic lately. He has zero drive. But listen, I talked to the regional director today. If you keep feeding me the internal reports from your old firm, I can easily get you that senior analyst position. Just keep pretending to be Julian's sounding board so he does not get suspicious. We need to keep him completely docile while I sort out the mortgage paperwork and get the real estate in my name." I stood frozen in the hallway. My own best friend. The guy who came over for beers, the guy who stood by me at my wedding, the guy who listened to me vent about my marital struggles was selling me out for a corporate job. He was actively using my pain as a networking tool with my own wife. I gripped the wooden door frame until my knuckles turned completely white. I did not confront them right then. I retreated quietly. I realized that my desperate desire for a normal, middle-class life had surrounded me with absolute vultures. They were picking my bones clean, genuinely thinking I had nothing of value to offer them except my total subservience. I thought that was the absolute worst of it. I thought losing my wife and my best friend was the absolute bottom. But the darkness was just beginning to gather, and the true storm was entirely unseen. The disrespect in our home escalated rapidly from private snide remarks to public humiliation. Vanessa completely stopped inviting me to her corporate events altogether. She told me to my face that I did not fit the brand of a rising executive, and that my presence would only hinder her networking opportunities. Then Marcus entered the picture. Marcus was the newly appointed vice president of her division. He drove a flashy, obnoxious sports car, wore custom Italian suits, and looked at everyone below him like they were peasants begging for scraps. Vanessa was completely and utterly mesmerized by him. She started coming home late every single night, smelling heavily of expensive scotch and a distinct men's cologne that definitely did not belong to me. She told me they were late-night strategy sessions for a massive upcoming acquisition. I am not an idiot, but when you love someone, your brain works overtime to justify their lies. You want to believe the best in the person you married, even when the brutal truth is screaming right in your face. The final puzzle piece fell into place exactly a month before she handed me those divorce papers. I was cleaning out the home office, filing away some tax documents for the year, when I found a hidden folder shoved deep in the back of Vanessa's desk drawer. It was not about her job. It was a thick stack of financial notices addressed to her parents, Richard and Beatrice. They were drowning in debt. Massive, crushing, suffocating debt. I am talking about multiple remortgages on their house, maxed out high-interest credit cards, and a massive pending lawsuit from a general contractor they simply never paid for a kitchen remodel. They were completely bankrupt, living entirely on credit and lies to maintain their country club illusion. Beneath the terrifying bank notices was a printed email thread between Vanessa and her mother. I read the words, and my blood ran ice cold in my veins. Beatrice had written, "You need to lock Marcus down immediately. He makes high six figures. If you do not secure him, your father and I will lose the house to the bank. We cannot sustain this lifestyle anymore. You need to dump Julian immediately. He is a financial anchor. Marcus is your ticket, and he is our ticket out of this mess. Divorce him before he tries to claim any of your new salary or your bonuses. Do not let him take what is ours." Vanessa had replied, "I know, Mom. I am working on it. Marcus is taking me to the Hamptons next weekend. I will have the divorce papers drawn up by my lawyer soon. Julian will not fight it, he has no spine. I will make sure I get the house and the savings." It was a cold, calculated transaction. My entire marriage was not failing because we simply grew apart. It was failing because I was no longer a profitable asset to a family of grifters. They were literally trading me in for a better, wealthier model to pay off their secret debts. They wanted to discard me so they could secure a new source of income. I carefully put the papers back exactly where I found them. I did not cry. The sadness had completely burned away, leaving nothing but a cold, hard, razor-sharp clarity in my mind. The next day, I went to work at the nonprofit. I sat in the break room, staring blankly at the wall, processing the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. My colleague Clara walked in. Clara was a fierce, perceptive woman who had always treated me with immense respect. She was a true friend. She took one look at my face and immediately sat down next to me. "What is it, Julian? You look like you are attending your own funeral." I told her everything. The cheating, the mother-in-law's crippling debt, the impending divorce. I did not tell her about my family's immense wealth, but I told her enough about the situation. Clara looked at me, her eyes blazing with protective anger. "Julian, you have spent years shrinking yourself so this woman could feel big. You let her stand on your back to reach the top shelf, and now she is complaining that you are covered in dirt. Stop protecting her. Prepare yourself. When the storm hits, you need to be the one standing on solid ground. Do not let her walk all over you." That night, I started quietly packing. Not the big things. Just my most important personal documents, some precious family heirlooms, a few books that mattered to me. I put them in a small box and stored it securely in the trunk of my car. I started reviewing the deed to the house, digging into the fine print. I made a very important phone call to Caldwell, my family's senior estate lawyer. I asked him to set a few crucial things in motion behind the scenes. I knew the papers were coming. I knew she was going to try and blindside me. I just did not know she was going to be foolish enough to try and humiliate my father in the process. Which brings us right back to the kitchen, the signed divorce papers sitting on the counter, and Vanessa laughing hysterically about my family supposedly showing up in a junk car to haul away their useless son. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy, thick mist hanging over our perfectly manicured suburban street. In a neighborhood exactly like ours, absolutely nothing goes unnoticed. The houses are built close together, the lawns are immaculate, and the neighbors are always watching from behind their curtains. Through the kitchen window, I saw Sylvia, the elderly woman from across the street. She was standing on her porch with her gardening shears, completely frozen. She had stopped moving entirely. She was staring down the road, her eyes wide with shock. Vanessa was aggressively pouring herself a celebratory cup of coffee, completely oblivious to the outside world. "You should probably go wait out on the porch, Julian. I do not want your dad tracking cheap mud into my foyer when he gets here." She heavily emphasized the word my foyer, my house, my rules. I did not say a single word in response. I just walked straight to the front door and pulled it open. Vanessa followed closely behind me, holding her coffee mug, wearing her incredibly smug, self-satisfied smile. She was ready to watch me be humiliated. Then, the low, powerful, synchronized hum of heavy engines completely broke the silence of the neighborhood. Turning the corner onto our quiet street was not a beat-up Ford. It was not a rusty pickup truck. It was a massive, pristine, pitch-black Rolls-Royce Phantom. Vanessa's smug smile faltered slightly as the massive luxury car glided smoothly over the wet pavement, the classic ornament gleaming on the hood. "Who the hell is lost in our neighborhood?" she muttered, taking a step forward. But it was not just one car. Right behind the first Rolls-Royce came a second, then a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. An entire convoy of 6 identical, gleaming black Rolls-Royces crawled down our street. They moved with a synchronized, terrifying, predatory grace. Every single neighbor was now out on their porch or actively peering through their front blinds. The neighborhood mailman had completely stopped his delivery truck at the corner, staring in absolute disbelief. The lead car pulled directly into our driveway, stopping mere inches from Vanessa's leased BMW, completely dwarfing it in size and presence. The other 5 vehicles parked perfectly along the curb, boxing in the entire property. There was no way in and no way out. Vanessa's coffee mug literally shook in her hand. Hot coffee spilled over the rim and onto the porch, but she did not even notice. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Who are these people?" The doors of the vehicles opened simultaneously, in perfect unison. Drivers wearing immaculate, tailored black suits stepped out into the mist. The driver of the lead car walked briskly to the rear passenger side and opened the heavy door. My father stepped out. He was not wearing the cheap, casual sweaters he wore during our fake middle-class dinners. Harrison Whitmore was wearing a bespoke, custom-tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Vanessa's entire yearly salary. He carried a silver-tipped walking cane, not because he needed it for balance, but because he liked the heavy, authoritative weight of it in his hand. His posture was absolute iron. He looked exactly like the billionaire titan of industry that he truly was. My mother, Margaret, stepped out right behind him from the other side of the car. She was draped in an elegant dark cashmere coat, with real diamonds glittering subtly at her throat. She looked like absolute royalty stepping onto a muddy battlefield. Vanessa's jaw practically unhinged. She looked at the convoy of cars, then at my wealthy parents, then back at me. Her brain was completely short-circuiting, trying to process the impossible reality standing in her driveway. "And Mr. Whitmore?" she stammered, the arrogant, ruthless corporate shark suddenly sounding like a terrified, confused little child. My father did not look at her. He did not even acknowledge her miserable existence. He walked straight up the driveway, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the concrete, his eyes locked entirely on me. "Are you ready, Julian?" he asked, his deep voice cutting sharply through the damp morning air. I stood taller than I had in 8 long years. "I am dead." My mother walked past Vanessa as if she were nothing more than a dirty stain on the concrete. She gently touched my cheek, her eyes full of sorrow and fierce pride. "I am so terribly sorry you had to endure this woman, my boy." Vanessa finally found her voice, though it was high-pitched, frantic, and trembling uncontrollably. "Julian, what is going on? Why? Whose cars are these? Did your parents rent these for a funeral? What kind of prank is this?" My father finally stopped. He turned his head slowly to look at the woman who had just called him to collect his useless son. "We do not rent, Vanessa," my father said quietly, his voice dripping with absolute, freezing authority. "We own." He raised his hand slightly, a barely perceptible gesture of command. The door of the third Rolls-Royce opened, and the person who stepped out of that car was about to end Vanessa's entire corporate existence right there on the wet pavement. The incredibly heavy, armored door of the third black Rolls-Royce swung open into the damp morning air, and the man who stepped out onto the wet concrete of my driveway was none other than Victor Sterling. To understand the sheer magnitude of this moment, you have to understand exactly who Victor Sterling was in the corporate world. Victor was the chief executive officer of the massive, multinational logistics corporation where Vanessa had spent the last several years ruthlessly clawing her way up the corporate ladder. He was a man known throughout the global shipping and freight industry for his absolute ruthlessness, his razor-sharp eye for highly profitable corporate acquisitions, and his utter intolerance for professional incompetence. He was the kind of legendary executive who fired senior vice presidents over a single missed decimal point in a quarterly earnings report. He did not mingle with middle management. He did not attend casual Friday office parties. He operated from a penthouse office in Chicago, surrounded by a fortress of executive assistants and corporate lawyers. To a hyper-ambitious social climber like Vanessa, Victor Sterling was basically a living god. She had spent countless late evenings pacing back and forth in our living room, rehearsing exactly what she would say, how she would pitch her ideas, and how she would stand if she ever got more than 30 seconds of elevator time with him. She worshipped his status, his unfathomable wealth, and his unyielding authority over the thousands of people who worked beneath him. And now, here he was, standing in the middle of our suburban driveway, in the middle of a Tuesday morning rainstorm. I watched Vanessa's face as her brain desperately tried to process the completely impossible image right in front of her. The sheer terror and deep confusion that had gripped her just moments earlier when the luxury cars arrived completely vanished. It was instantly replaced by a blinding, arrogant wave of self-importance. If you have ever dealt with a true narcissist, you know exactly what I am talking about. In her twisted, self-centered mind, there was only one logical explanation for why the untouchable CEO of her company would arrive at her house in a massive fleet of luxury cars alongside two wealthy, impeccably dressed strangers. She genuinely believed this entire spectacle was about her. She actually thought this was some kind of elaborate, highly confidential corporate extraction. Perhaps he was offering her a massive, unprecedented promotion. Perhaps Victor had finally recognized her unparalleled brilliance from afar and wanted to personally invite her to join the global executive board. Her ego was so massive that it completely blinded her to the very obvious danger standing right in front of her. It was the ultimate, fatal trap of complacency. She had spent so many years believing she was the smartest, most important, and most indispensable person in any given room that she was completely incapable of reading the absolute disaster unfolding right before her eyes. Victor adjusted the crisp cuffs of his immaculate, custom-tailored navy blue suit. His expression was completely unreadable, a blank mask of corporate stoicism, as he slowly surveyed the property, glancing at the rain-soaked lawn, the leased BMW, and finally, the woman standing on the porch holding a coffee mug. Vanessa immediately snapped into her aggressive corporate persona. She smoothed down the front of her expensive designer trench coat, quickly pushed her damp hair behind her ears to look more professional, and plastered on the most painfully fake, sycophantic smile I had ever witnessed in my entire life. She completely ignored my parents, who were standing right next to her like towering figures of authority, and she completely ignored me, the husband she had just discarded. She stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking rapidly on the wet driveway, aggressively extending her hand toward the CEO. Mr. Sterling. She let out a breathy, high-pitched, incredibly forced laugh that grated on my nerves. I absolutely cannot believe you are here in Ohio. I deeply apologize for the terrible weather, and I profoundly apologize for this ridiculous, embarrassing domestic scene on my property. You see, I am in the middle of finalizing my divorce from my husband, Julian. She gestured dismissively toward me with a flick of her wrist, not even bothering to turn her head in my direction. She spoke about me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered onto her pristine lawn. He is just leaving, she continued, her voice dripping with venomous condescension and desperate eagerness to impress. He is completely unmotivated, no ambition whatsoever. He has been a massive financial anchor dragging down my career trajectory for years. I am finally cutting the dead weight so I can focus entirely and exclusively on the upcoming regional merger. Please, I beg you, do not let this messy domestic situation reflect poorly on my professional dedication to the firm. I am completely 100% committed to the company. Did you come all this way from Chicago to discuss the new vice president position? Because I assure you, with this massive distraction finally out of my house and out of my life forever, my schedule is entirely clear for you. I am ready to take on the new territory immediately. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting comfortably in my pockets, watching her dig her own professional grave with a massive excavator. She was so incredibly desperate for corporate validation, so blindly hungry for power and status, that she was entirely willing to publicly humiliate her husband of 8 years in front of her ultimate boss just to score a few cheap corporate brownie points. She was offering up my dignity and our entire history together as a pathetic sacrifice on the altar of her career. Victor Sterling did not take her outstretched hand. He did not even look at her hand. He kept his hands clasped firmly behind his back, his sharp, predatory eyes fixed squarely on Vanessa's face. The silence that stretched between them was not just awkward. It was heavy, suffocating, and loaded with a kind of immense tension that makes your teeth literally ache. It was the silence of a judge looking at a condemned prisoner. Vanessa's hand slowly, awkwardly dropped to her side. Her fake, plastered smile began to tremble violently at the edges. The horrifying realization that Victor was not smiling back, that he was not engaging in her forced corporate banter, and that he was looking at her with absolute disgust, began to slowly seep into her panicked mind. "Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly, the arrogant confidence rapidly draining out of her. "Is everything all right? Is this about my direct supervisor, Marcus? Because Marcus and I have been working very closely on the new logistics framework for the entire Midwest region, and I can assure you our strategy is absolutely flawless. We are projected to increase revenue by 20% this quarter." She was trying so incredibly hard to project strength, to aggressively prove that she belonged in this exclusive circle of immense wealth and untouchable power. She genuinely thought she was speaking his language. She genuinely thought she was playing the corporate game perfectly. She had no idea the game had already ended, and she had lost everything. Victor finally spoke. His voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was completely flat, devoid of any warmth, any professional courtesy, or any basic human empathy. "Ms. Vance." He did not use her married name. He did not use her first name. The formal, icy, incredibly distant address hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. "You seem to be operating under a very profound, almost comical misunderstanding of exactly why I am currently standing in this driveway," Victor said, his words slow, measured, and deliberate. "I am not here to discuss your career trajectory. I am not here to discuss your highly flawed regional merger plans. And I am certainly not here to offer a highly coveted promotion to a deeply unstable employee who publicly degrades her own family in a pathetic attempt to impress a corporate superior." Vanessa's face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly, pale shade of gray. Her mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. She looked wildly from Victor to the massive fleet of Rolls-Royces, and then, finally, to my father, who was watching her with the cold, detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly foolish and destructive insect. Victor turned away from Vanessa completely, cutting her off entirely. He walked past her as if she were a piece of broken, discarded furniture left on the curb for the trash collectors. He walked directly up to my father, stopped at a very respectful distance, and gave a sharp, incredibly deferential bow of his head. It was a gesture of total submission from one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. Mr. Whitmore, Victor said, his tone entirely different now. It was filled with deep, unwavering respect and absolute, unquestioning loyalty. I deeply apologize for the slight delay this morning. The final signatures from the federal regulators took slightly longer than we initially anticipated, but the paperwork is now fully executed and filed. My father nodded once, leaning slightly on his expensive silver-tipped cane. Excellent work, Victor. I trust the corporate transition is proceeding smoothly? Flawlessly, sir, Victor replied immediately. The board of directors was entirely cooperative once they saw the overwhelming financial terms of the buyout. They stepped down without a single fight. Vanessa was literally swaying on her feet. Her eyes were darting rapidly back and forth between her supposedly untouchable CEO and the man she had just aggressively called on the phone to demand he pick up his trash. The absolute, staggering impossibility of the situation was breaking her mind into a million pieces. She could not reconcile the quiet, middle-class retired man she thought she knew with the billionaire titan currently standing in her driveway receiving a bow from the man who controlled her entire industry. "Excuse me," Vanessa interrupted, her voice shrill, frantic, and filled with rising panic. "I do not understand. Mr. Sterling, why are you speaking to Julian's father? How do you know him? What corporate paperwork are you talking about? What is happening right now?" Victor slowly turned back to face her. The look of utter, profound disgust on his face was something I will remember for the rest of my natural life. He looked at her not just as a terrible employee, but as a fundamentally flawed, morally bankrupt human being. "It is truly remarkable, Ms. Vance," Victor said quietly, the venom in his voice unmistakable. "You spend so much of your pathetic life frantically trying to climb the corporate ladder, looking desperately upward to see who you can impress, who you can manipulate, and who you can step on, that you never once bothered to look down at the massive foundation you were standing on." He stepped to the side, gesturing respectfully with his open hand toward my father. "You clearly have absolutely no idea who this man is," Victor continued. "Allow me to formally introduce you to reality. This is Harrison Whitmore. He is the founder, the primary shareholder, and the absolute sovereign of Whitmore Holdings. As of exactly 8 o'clock this morning, Whitmore Holdings has successfully executed a hostile takeover and fully acquired our entire global logistics corporation. We are now a wholly owned subsidiary of his family's empire. He owns the buildings. He owns the trucks. He owns the contracts. And he owns your job." Vanessa stumbled backward violently. Her expensive designer heel caught on a crack in the wet driveway, and she nearly fell directly into the muddy grass. She managed to catch herself by slamming her hands onto the hood of her leased BMW, her chest heaving as she gasped desperately for air. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently from side to side. "No, that is completely impossible. Julian works at a tiny charity. His family lives in a rental property in the suburbs. They drive old cars. You are lying. This is a trick. Julian put you up to this." My father finally stepped forward. He closed the physical distance between them, his towering, intimidating presence completely engulfing her shrinking form. "My son works at a charity because he possesses something you severely lack, Vanessa. He possesses actual, genuine character." My father's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that carried clearly across the quiet street. He wanted to build a real life based on genuine human connection, not bloated bank balances. He wanted to find a loyal partner who loved him for the kind man he is, not the massive empire he stands to inherit. We played along with your arrogant, superficial delusions for 8 long years because my son loved you. We sat in your dining room at your dreadful Thanksgiving dinners. We listened to your toxic mother loudly insult my son's salary and his worth. We watched you systematically tear him down, piece by piece, day after day, because you foolishly thought his kindness was a weakness you could exploit. My father leaned in slightly, his dark eyes boring directly into her terrified soul. "You called my son useless. You called him dead weight. You demanded I come collect my trash. You thought you held all the power because you received a minor corporate promotion. You hold nothing. Vanessa was openly weeping now. Thick, black streaks of expensive mascara were running rapidly down her pale cheeks. She was shaking uncontrollably, her manicured fingers digging frantically into the metal of her car for any kind of physical support. "Mr. Whitmore, please, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know anything about this. If Julian had just told me the truth about his massive inheritance, I never would have." "You never would have what?" My mother interrupted, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with my father. Margaret Whitmore's voice was sharp enough to cut solid diamond. "You never would have cheated on him with your vice president? You never would have conspired in secret with your bankrupt, grifter parents to use my son as a financial stepping stone? You never would have treated him like an unpaid servant in his own home?" Vanessa physically flinched as if she had been brutally slapped across the face. She had absolutely no idea we knew about Marcus. She had absolutely no idea we knew about her parents' crippling, secret debt. The horrifying realization that every single one of her dirty, selfish, incredibly destructive secrets was completely exposed to the light of day left her utterly defenseless. I was standing quietly in the background, leaning against the doorway, watching the woman who had tormented me for years finally face the brutal, unavoidable reality of her own actions. The trap of complacency had sprung shut, and she was caught firmly in its razor-sharp jaws. She had been so blinded by her own uncontrollable greed and massive self-importance that she had walked right off the edge of a massive cliff, dragging her entire career, her reputation, and her entire future down with her. But the revelations were not over yet. The true twist, the absolute systematic destruction of everything she thought she owned, was just about to begin. The rain had started to lightly fall again, a fine, freezing cold mist that clung to the immaculate black paint of the massive Rolls-Royces parked along the curb. The entire neighborhood was completely, terrifyingly silent, completely captivated by the unprecedented drama unfolding right in my driveway. I could clearly see the dark silhouettes of my neighbors pressing eagerly against their front living room windows. They were witnessing the total public dismantling of a woman who had spent the last several years aggressively bragging to them about her massive corporate success, her expensive designer lifestyle, and her superior intellect at every single neighborhood HOA meeting. Vanessa was fully hyperventilating. Her chest was rising and falling in rapid, desperate gasps. She was completely trapped between the terrifying, unquestionable authority of my billionaire father, the sharp, aristocratic disgust of my mother, and the cold, unforgiving professionalism of her CEO. She desperately tried to pivot, trying frantically to find some new angle, some loophole to save her precious career. She turned her panicked, heavily tear-filled eyes toward Victor. "Mr. Sterling, please, you have to listen to me. You have to understand. My personal life is currently very complicated, but my professional record at the firm is absolutely impeccable. I am a top-tier earner for this company. I single-handedly brought in the Miller Logistics account. I deeply deserve my management position. You cannot legally let a personal domestic dispute interfere with corporate operations. It is a massive violation of human resources policy. I will sue for wrongful termination." Victor actually laughed out loud. It was a short, harsh, incredibly abrasive sound completely devoid of any real humor. "Company policy, Ms. Vance?" he repeated, his tone dripping with heavy, undisguised mocking. "Do you really, truly want to discuss company policy right now? Because we have spent the last 12 consecutive hours conducting a massive, exhaustive internal audit of the entire regional division you and your new romantic partner, Marcus, have been allegedly running." Vanessa instantly froze. The direct mention of Marcus by the CEO made the blood in her veins run completely cold. The color drained from her face even further, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. "We found the financial discrepancies. Vanessa," Victor continued, his voice hardening into unbreakable steel. "We found the heavily doctored, fraudulent expense reports. We found the massive, illegal kickbacks Marcus was secretly taking from third-party freight vendors to fund his luxury sports cars and those highly expensive weekend trips to the Hamptons you two enjoyed so much on the company dime. And, most importantly, we found your direct digital signature on dozens of those fraudulent approvals." You thought you were so incredibly clever, hiding your illicit affairs and your massive financial fraud behind the convenient guise of late-night executive strategy sessions. That is a complete lie, Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing loudly down the quiet suburban street. I didn't know what Marcus was doing. I swear to you, he manipulated me. I just signed the papers he put in front of me. I am innocent. Save your pathetic lies for the corporate defense lawyers. Ms. Vance, Victor said smoothly, completely unmoved by her screaming. As of this exact moment in time, your employment at this corporation is officially and permanently terminated with cause. Marcus was forcibly escorted out of the corporate building by armed security exactly 20 minutes ago. Security personnel have already packed the contents of your desk into cardboard boxes. Those boxes will be shipped via standard mail to whatever forwarding address you provide. Furthermore, our corporate legal department will be filing a massive, multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against both of you for severe corporate embezzlement to aggressively recover every single cent of the stolen funds. Vanessa's knees completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the wet concrete of the driveway, her expensive designer coat soaking up the dirty puddle water, completely ruining the fabric. She covered her face with her trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking violently. The high-paying job she had sacrificed her entire marriage for, the prestigious career she had constantly used as a heavy weapon to bludgeon my self-esteem on a daily basis, was completely and totally gone. She was not just fired. She was facing a devastating, highly public lawsuit that would permanently and irreparably destroy her reputation in the logistics industry. She would never work in corporate America again. But my family was not finished dismantling her illusion. My father raised his hand a second time. The heavy door of the fourth black Rolls-Royce opened, and an older, highly distinguished gentleman with slicked-back silver hair and sharp wire-rimmed glasses stepped out into the mist. He was carrying a sleek, incredibly expensive black leather briefcase. This was Caldwell. He was the senior, lead estate lawyer for the Whitmore Family Trust. He was a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who regularly handled billion-dollar commercial real estate acquisitions before he even finished his morning coffee. He walked slowly up the driveway with measured, completely unhurried steps, completely ignoring the weeping, broken woman sobbing on the ground. He stopped directly in front of me and offered a brief, highly respectful nod. Good morning, Julian. I have the finalized documents you requested last night. Thank you, Caldwell, I replied quietly. Caldwell unlatched his heavy briefcase with a loud click and pulled out a thick stack of complex legal paperwork heavily stamped with official county and state seals. He slowly turned his attention to Vanessa, looking down at her over the rims of his glasses with the kind of clinical detachment one might reserve for a squashed bug. Ms. Vance, if you could please pull yourself together for one final legal matter, Caldwell said in a dry, monotonous, entirely unsympathetic legal tone. Vanessa slowly looked up, her face a completely smeared, desperate, horrific mess of tears and ruined makeup. What else? What else could you possibly want from me? You already took my entire job. You took Marcus. You ruined my life. I have absolutely nothing left. I just want my husband to pack his things and leave my house so I can be alone and call a lawyer. Your house? Caldwell asked, raising a single, skeptical eyebrow. I believe you are operating under a massive, legally indefensible delusion regarding the actual ownership of this specific property. What the hell are you talking about? Vanessa snapped, a brief, desperate flash of her old, toxic arrogance returning for just a second. Both of our names are on the official deed. I pay the vast majority of the mortgage out of my salary. It is my house. I gave Julian the divorce papers this morning. He signed them. I am legally keeping the real estate in the settlement. Caldwell calmly flipped open a large, heavily text-laden document. That is highly inaccurate, Ms. Vance. 8 years ago, when you and Julian were initially searching for a starter home, you severely struggled to secure a favorable mortgage rate due to your incredibly limited credit history and massive student debt at the time. Julian explicitly informed you that a silent, private investor from his nonprofit network had graciously offered to purchase the home outright in cash. and you would simply pay a highly subsidized monthly rent to this investor to build your savings. Yes, I remember that arrangement, Vanessa said, her voice shaking with rising panic. So what? We have been paying that rent faithfully for 8 years. We have equity. You have been paying rent. Caldwell corrected her smoothly, tapping the paper with his expensive pen. To a private holding company legally registered as Evergreen Properties, LLC. He flipped the page, knelt down slightly, and held the document out so she could clearly see the bold, unmistakable print at the top of the page. Evergreen Properties, LLC is a wholly owned, direct subsidiary of the Whitmore Family Trust, Caldwell stated firmly. Julian's grandfather purchased this property in pure cash 8 years ago as a protective, highly confidential measure to ensure his beloved grandson always had a completely secure roof over his head, regardless of his financial situation or his marital status. Your name is not on the deed, Ms. Vance. Your name has never, at any point in history, been on the deed. You do not own a single square inch of this property. You do not have equity. You are, legally speaking, nothing more than a standard month-to-month tenant. The silence that followed that massive revelation was absolute, ringing in my ears. I could clearly hear the cold rain tapping gently against the roof of the house. I could hear Vanessa's ragged, incredibly shallow breathing. She stared at the legal documents in Caldwell's steady hand as if they were written in an ancient, completely indecipherable foreign language. Her narcissism simply refused to process the sheer magnitude of the total loss. The beautiful house she had paraded around in, the house she had continuously bragged about to her toxic mother, the house she had literally tried to kick me out of exactly 20 minutes ago, belonged entirely and exclusively to my family. Therefore, Caldwell continued, completely unfazed by her total mental breakdown, acting on direct, unyielding instructions from the legal property owner. I am hereby serving you with immediate, legally binding notice of eviction. As you have repeatedly and aggressively expressed a deep desire to remove my client from your physical presence, we are simply accommodating your request to the fullest extent of the law. You have until exactly 5 o'clock this evening to remove all of your personal belongings from the premises. Any items left behind after 5 o'clock will be legally considered abandoned property and will be immediately disposed of by a private commercial cleaning crew. Vanessa let out a guttural, agonizing, primal scream. It was the horrific sound of a woman watching her entire, carefully constructed universe violently implode all at once. She had tried to steal my fundamental dignity, my home, and my future, and in the incredibly brief span of exactly 15 minutes, she had lost absolutely everything she valued in this world. She scrambled on the wet concrete on her hands and knees, crawling frantically toward my legs. She grabbed the fabric of my trousers, her hot tears soaking instantly through the material. Julian, please, please, I am so incredibly sorry. I didn't mean any of it. I was stressed. I was confused. My mother pushed me into this. Marcus manipulated my feelings. I love you. I have always loved you. Please, don't let them do this to me. I have nowhere to go. You are my husband. You have to protect me. I looked down at the woman I had spent 8 long years unconditionally loving. I looked at the hands that had violently thrown divorce papers at me just an hour ago. I searched my soul, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no desire for revenge. Just a profound, incredibly heavy emptiness, followed closely by the exhilarating, liberating sensation of total, absolute freedom. I reached down and gently, but incredibly firmly, pried her desperate, clutching fingers off my legs. I stepped back, putting physical and emotional distance between us forever. You do not love me, Vanessa, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet, listening street. You love the idea of massive wealth. You love corporate status. You love ultimate power. You loved Marcus when you thought he could give you those shallow things, and now that he is completely ruined, you suddenly love me again simply because you see a massive fleet of Rolls-Royces parked in the driveway. She sobbed, shaking her head wildly. No, Julian, please, you have to believe me. I looked her dead in the eyes, ensuring she heard every single word of my final, unwavering judgment. You did not lose a wealthy husband today, Vanessa, I said quietly, the finality ringing in the air. You lost the only man in this entire world who genuinely loved you before your corporate success, your dirty money, or your fake status ever mattered. You aggressively threw away a real, beautiful life to chase an illusion, and now you have to live entirely alone in the miserable ruins you created. I turned my back on her. I did not look back. I walked steadily toward the lead Rolls-Royce. The driver instantly held the heavy armored door open for me. My parents were already inside the luxurious cabin, waiting patiently. I slid into the incredibly soft leather seat, and the heavy door thudded shut, instantly sealing away the terrible sound of her frantic, pathetic screaming in the rain. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. As the massive convoy of 6 black Rolls-Royces smoothly pulled away from the curb, leaving our quiet, heavily observing suburban street behind forever, I looked out the dark tinted window one very last time. Vanessa was still sitting directly on the wet concrete of the driveway, surrounded by the pouring, relentless rain. The legal divorce papers she had so proudly and aggressively slammed onto the kitchen counter had blown out the open front door. They were now scattered completely across the front lawn, the black ink rapidly running, the important legal pages turning into useless, soggy mush in the muddy puddles. She looked incredibly small, completely broken, and entirely, utterly alone. The neighbors she had spent years aggressively trying to impress, the people she had constantly bragged to about her corporate success, were now standing silently on their porches, watching her ultimate, catastrophic humiliation with barely concealed satisfaction. She had built her entire existence on a fragile foundation of arrogance and cruelty, and it had finally crumbled completely beneath her own massive weight. But the universe, in its infinite pursuit of perfect balance, was not entirely finished delivering its justice. What happened over the next 6 incredibly chaotic months was an absolute masterclass in the systematic, unavoidable destruction of toxic, greedy people. Vanessa's parents, Richard and Beatrice, the true, hidden architects of our disastrous divorce, faced their own absolutely catastrophic financial downfall. For years, Beatrice had viciously whispered poison into Vanessa's ear, aggressively demanding she divorce me to marry Marcus, so they could selfishly use his high executive salary to save their completely failing personal finances. They had built a massive, insurmountable mountain of hidden debt to artificially maintain their elite country club membership, their multiple luxury cars, and their incredibly fragile illusion of upper-class superiority. When Vanessa was abruptly fired with extreme cause and simultaneously slapped with a massive corporate civil lawsuit for millions of dollars in embezzlement, her high income completely vanished overnight. She could no longer secretly funnel money to her parents to cover their incredibly high-interest loans. Without Vanessa's inflated salary to prop them up, the fragile, pathetic house of cards Richard and Beatrice had built instantly and violently collapsed. Within 2 very short months, the bank officially foreclosed on their massive, pretentious 5-bedroom suburban house. The general contractor they had arrogantly refused to pay for their expensive kitchen remodel finally won his long-standing lawsuit, immediately freezing all of their remaining liquid assets. They were violently forced to sell their precious luxury cars at a massive, embarrassing loss just to afford basic legal representation to keep themselves out of jail. The exact same elite country club friends they had desperately tried to impress completely abandoned them the very second the money ran dry. Beatrice, the incredibly cruel woman who used to publicly mock my reliable used car at Thanksgiving dinner, was now humiliatingly forced to take the public city bus to the discount grocery store. They were forced to pack up their remaining cheap belongings and move into a tiny, cramped, deeply depressing 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown, dangerous part of the city. And Vanessa had absolutely no choice but to move in with them. Because of the incredibly severe nature of her highly public termination and the pending multimillion-dollar embezzlement lawsuit, Vanessa was completely and permanently blacklisted from the entire corporate logistics industry. No reputable firm in the entire country would even look at her heavily tainted resume. The brilliant, rising executive who had once scoffed loudly at my nonprofit salary, calling me a useless maid, was now forced to accept an entry-level, minimum-wage administrative position at a small, failing retail warehouse just to help her parents keep the basic electricity on in their cramped apartment. They spent their miserable evenings screaming violently at each other, completely trapped in a tiny space, entirely consumed by the bitter, inescapable resentment of their own massive failures. Marcus, the flashy, arrogant vice president who had promised Vanessa the absolute world, viciously turned on her the second the corporate auditors closed in. During the intense legal depositions, he cowardly attempted to blame the entire massive embezzlement scheme on Vanessa, loudly claiming she had expertly forged his signatures and manipulated the corporate accounts entirely without his knowledge. Unfortunately for him, Victor Sterling's aggressive legal team was incredibly thorough. They uncovered an extensive, undeniable digital paper trail clearly proving Marcus was the ultimate mastermind of the theft. He was permanently banned from the entire financial sector by federal regulators. His personal assets were completely seized to repay the stolen corporate funds, and he was facing serious, multi-year criminal charges. The absolute last I heard, he was living miserably in his sister's unfinished basement, completely bankrupt and awaiting trial. And then there was Greg, my former best friend, the man who had sat comfortably on my couch, drank my beer, and sympathetically listened to my deepest marital insecurities, only to secretly funnel that highly personal information to Vanessa in exchange for a senior analyst position at her firm. When Whitmore Holdings officially acquired the Logistics Corporation, my father immediately ordered a complete, ruthless restructuring of the entire middle management tier. Victor Sterling personally reviewed the highly questionable hiring practices of Vanessa's specific division. It did not take very long for the auditors to discover that Greg completely lacked the actual, required qualifications for the senior analyst role and had been hired entirely based on blatant corporate nepotism and Vanessa's aggressive, manipulative pushing. Greg was immediately terminated without severance during the very first round of corporate layoffs. He desperately tried to call me. He left dozens of frantic, tearful voicemails, begging loudly for my forgiveness, desperately claiming he had been temporarily blinded by ambition, swearing that our friendship meant so much more to him than any job. He practically begged me to talk to my father, to use my massive influence to get him his high-paying position back. I never answered a single call. I simply blocked his number across all platforms and completely erased him from my life. People who willingly sell your deep loyalty for a quick paycheck do not deserve a second chance to hold the knife to your back. The immediate aftermath of the brutal divorce was incredibly chaotic, but it was also profoundly, deeply validating. For 8 incredibly long years, I had been told I was completely useless. I had been told I was a massive financial burden, a dead weight, a man without any ambition or a viable future. I had slowly internalized that incredibly toxic narrative, allowing it to slowly chip away at my core self-esteem. Watching the horrible people who had systematically abused me face the brutal, completely unavoidable consequences of their own incredibly greedy actions was the closure I desperately needed to heal. It proved to me that the universe ultimately balances the scales of justice. It proved that true, enduring wealth is not measured by the expensive brand of your custom suit or the massive size of your suburban house, but by the solid integrity of your character when the brutal storms of life finally hit. They had deliberately chosen money over loyalty, and in the end, they were left with absolutely nothing but their own regret. The psychological healing process was absolutely not instantaneous. You do not simply walk away from a highly abusive 8-year marriage and immediately feel completely whole again, regardless of exactly how incredibly toxic the relationship ultimately was. There were many dark nights I woke up in my new, quiet apartment, instinctively reaching out for a woman who was no longer there. There were days when the profound, incredibly deep sense of betrayal felt like a massive physical weight pressing aggressively down on my chest, making it incredibly hard to breathe. But my incredibly supportive family gave me the necessary space and the absolute unconditional support I desperately needed to slowly rebuild my life on my own terms. My father did not aggressively pressure me to immediately join the high-stress corporate board of Whitmore Holdings. My mother did not smother me with unwanted pity. They simply reminded me, through their quiet strength and unwavering, protective presence, that my inherent value had never been defined by Vanessa's incredibly twisted, materialistic standards. I decided to completely channel my deep pain into genuine purpose. I went back to the nonprofit organization where I had worked for so many years. I sat down in the break room with Clara, the incredible colleague who had fiercely supported me during my absolute darkest moments, and I finally told her the complete truth about my family's immense wealth. She was shocked, of course, but her fundamental opinion of me never changed a single bit. She still saw me as Julian, the kind man who cared deeply about helping others. Together, using a truly massive, multimillion-dollar grant from the Whitmore Family Trust, Clara and I expanded the nonprofit's daily operations tenfold. We launched a massive, comprehensive new initiative specifically designed to provide free legal assistance, safe emergency housing, and expert financial counseling for men and women desperately escaping emotionally and financially abusive marriages. I wanted to ensure that absolutely no one else had to feel as trapped, as worthless, and as completely isolated as I had felt for the last 3 years of my horrible marriage. Immersing myself completely in this highly demanding work literally saved my life. Every single time we successfully helped a desperate victim secure a completely safe place to live, or helped them win a highly difficult custody battle against a violently abusive partner, a tiny, broken piece of my own heart finally healed. I found my true, lasting ambition, not in chasing meaningless corporate promotions or hoarding massive wealth, but in using my immense resources to fundamentally and permanently change people's lives for the better. During this incredibly healing process, my close professional relationship with Clara slowly evolved. It was not a sudden, fiery romance born out of shared trauma. It was a slow, incredibly steady, incredibly safe progression built entirely on deep mutual respect, profound honesty, and genuine friendship. Clara never looked at my family's massive bank accounts. She looked strictly at my character. When she held my hand, I never had to nervously wonder if she was secretly calculating my net worth. Exactly 2 years after my incredibly painful divorce, Clara and I were quietly, beautifully married in a small, completely private ceremony in my parents' lush garden. There were absolutely no fake corporate smiles, no toxic, greedy in-laws whispering insults in the corner, just a small, intimate group of people who genuinely, unconditionally loved us. I saw Vanessa exactly one final time. It was a random, incredibly cold Thursday afternoon, about 2.5 years after the day the massive fleet of Rolls-Royces arrived at our house. I was sitting in a small, quiet, independent coffee shop downtown, reviewing some complex legal documents for a massive new charity housing project we were launching. The bell above the heavy wooden door jingled, and a woman walked quickly in out of the freezing cold wind. Took me a very long moment to actually recognize her. It was Vanessa. She looked completely, entirely different. The expensive designer clothes were completely gone, replaced by a faded, oversized, highly practical winter coat. Her expensive, perfectly salon-styled hair was tied quickly back in a messy, practical ponytail. The arrogant, highly haughty spark that used to aggressively define her entire personality was completely and totally extinguished. She looked incredibly exhausted. She looked exactly like a woman who had spent the last 2 years carrying a massive, invisible, crushing weight. She walked slowly up to the counter to order a cheap black coffee, and as she turned, she saw me sitting quietly in the corner booth. She froze completely. All the color instantly drained from her tired face. She looked like she desperately wanted to turn around and run as fast as possible back out into the freezing street. But instead, she took a deep, visibly trembling breath and slowly, carefully walked over to my table. "Julian," she said, her voice completely broken and barely above a strained whisper. "Hello, Vanessa," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady. She stood there incredibly awkwardly, clutching her cheap paper coffee cup with both hands. I saw the large article in the local paper last week about the massive new housing shelter your nonprofit just opened. It really looks like you are doing really incredible, important work. Thank you. We are helping a lot of people in desperate need. She nodded slowly, looking down at her badly scuffed, cheap shoes. Julian, I know I have absolutely no right to speak to you ever again. I know I have no right to ask for absolutely anything. But I desperately need to say this to you. I need you to know that I am so incredibly, deeply sorry. For absolutely everything. For the terrible way I treated you. For the horrible things I said. For the massive arrogance. Losing absolutely everything. It violently forced me to actually look closely at the person I had become. And I absolutely hated her. I hated the incredibly selfish woman who violently threw away a genuinely good man for a completely fake corporate dream. I am working as a basic receptionist now. My parents are completely miserable. We have absolutely nothing. I really wanted you to know that I completely know it was all my terrible fault. You were a genuinely good husband, and I completely destroyed it. I quietly listened to her incredibly painful words. I looked deeply into her tired, entirely defeated eyes. I searched my own heart for any lingering anger, for a deep desire for revenge, for any lingering toxic resentment. But there was absolutely nothing. The deep well of bitterness was completely, totally dry. I had moved on so completely, built such a beautiful new life, that she felt exactly like a complete stranger from a completely different lifetime. I deeply appreciate you saying that, Vanessa, I said quietly. Takes immense courage to admit those things out loud. Hot tears instantly welled up in her incredibly tired eyes. Can you ever possibly forgive me? I looked at her, thinking deeply about the incredibly beautiful, secure life I had built with Clara, the profound, driving purpose I had found in my charity work, and the absolute, unshakable peace in my heart. I already have, Vanessa, I said completely honestly. I genuinely forgave you a very long time ago. Not for you but for me. Because carrying around that massive anger was simply too heavy. I truly hope you eventually find some peace. I truly hope you finally learn how to build a real life that doesn't completely depend on what other people think of you. She let out a small, incredibly heartbreaking sob. Thank you, Julian. She turned slowly and walked out of the quiet coffee shop, stepping back out into the brutal, freezing cold wind. I watched her completely disappear down the busy, gray street. I did not feel a massive sense of triumph. I just felt a quiet, profound, incredibly deep sense of permanent closure. The final, darkest chapter of that terrible story was officially, permanently closed forever. I calmly picked up my pen, turned back to my important charity documents, and went back to work building an incredible future that actually mattered. Thank you for deeply listening to my story. If there is absolutely one single thing I want you to take away from my painful experience, it is this: never, ever let anyone else maliciously determine your deep, inherent value. Your immense worth is absolutely not tied to your corporate salary, your job title, or the expensive brand of clothes you wear. Your true worth is entirely inherent in your strong character, your deep kindness, and the way you treat people when there is absolutely nothing for you to personally gain. If someone in your life is constantly, aggressively making you feel incredibly small, if they are cruelly measuring your deep love by your financial output, it is completely time to set a massive boundary and walk away permanently. You absolutely deserve to be deeply loved for exactly who you are, not what you can financially provide. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family or a toxic partner who aggressively prioritized social status over genuine love? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay incredibly strong, and always fiercely protect your deep inner peace.